Stellar Blade was supposed to be embarrassing. At least that was the vibe online for a while. Before the game even came out, a very loud part of internet had already decided exactly what it was. It was gooner bait, problematic, and basically everything wrong with gaming. It was treated like some forbidden game that had escaped from horny jail. And then something really inconvenient happened to the WoW crowd calling it trash. People played it, and even worse, people enjoyed it. Not in a, yeah, this is okay, I guess, kind of way either. No, the game already proved itself on PS5. It sold millions. People kept talking about it, and clearly wasn't just some internet controversy that disappeared after launch. And then it came to PC, and somehow it happened again. The launch was massive, the Steam numbers were insane for a single player action game. And suddenly, this game that was supposed to be a punchline started looking a lot more like a message. A very loud, very pretty, very Korean message. And that message was simple. Some studios still remember what gamers actually want to play. And that is why Stellar Blade's success was not just a win for one game, it was a warning to Western games. And before somebody pretends not to understand the point on purpose, no, Stellar Blade did not succeed only because Eve is attractive. That is the lazy version of the argument. Eve got people's attention, obviously. I mean, let's not insult everybody's intelligence here. The character design was part of the appeal. The outfits were part of the appeal. The entire visual identity of the game was part of the appeal. But attention is not the same thing as success. A hot character can make people click a trailer, it can make them wishlist the game on Steam, it can make people on Twitter lose their minds and have their scheduled daily meltdown. But that alone does not carry a full game. If the combat feels like trash, if the bosses are boring, if the soundtrack is forgettable and the whole thing feels cheap, people are not staying for 30 hours just because the main character is attractive. They might make the jokes, maybe buy the game on sale and then uninstall. So yeah, Eve got people's attention, obviously, but Stellar Blade had to keep that attention, and that is the part people love to ignore. And the reason Stellar Blade kept that attention is pretty simple. Underneath all the discourse, all the screenshots, and every person pretending to be deeply worried about the future of humanity because woman in a video game looked good, there was an actual game there. And I know that sounds obvious, but with the way people were talking about Stellar Blade, you would think it was just a gooner game with 5 hours of gameplay and nothing else going on. But that is not what people actually played. People played a good game. Not perfect and not the best game ever made, but good. Maybe even great, depending on what you want from this kind of game. And honestly, I do think Stellar Blade looks up to Nier Automata a lot. You can feel it in the atmosphere, the music, the character design, even the way the game tries to be stylish and emotional at the same time. But no, the story does not hit as hard as Nier, and some of the characters are not that interesting. Some of the dialogue is a little rough, and there are moments where the game clearly wants to be deeper than it actually is. But that does not make it a bad game, because overall, Stellar Blade works. The combat feels good, the world has atmosphere, the music actually adds something, and the game has a clear style you remember after turning it off. It has rough edges, sure. You can feel that Shift Up was making a game for specific audience instead of trying to build some universal approval machine. It was not trying to please everyone or be super diverse, just so people who were never going to buy it could give it a gold star on Twitter. It knew its audience, leaned into what they wanted and did not act embarrassed about it. And somehow in modern gaming that almost feels rebellious. And that is where the warning to the Western games really start. But not in the lazy Japan and Korea good West bad way. The conversation gets boring really fast, and honestly, it's not even the real point. But the real warning was much simpler than that. Stellar Blade showed that the audience was still there. There is still a huge audience for stylish action games, attractive character design, fan service that is actually attached to a real game, strong visual identity, and characters who are allowed to look cool, beautiful, exaggerated, unrealistic, or whatever word makes the people on Twitter start shaking. That audience did not disappear. They were just waiting for a game that did not act embarrassed to have them. And that is what made Stellar Blade different. It was not trying to win over everyone. It was not begging for approval from people who already hated the idea of it. The devs knew they were making a video game. That sounds stupidly obvious, but somehow it matters now. They understood that games are fantasy, they can be unrealistic, sexy, stylish, dumb in the best way, full of swords that make no practical sense, monsters designed by someone who probably needed therapy, and outfits that would get you killed in about 12 seconds if this was real life. And that is fine, because nobody played Stellar Blade because they wanted a realistic documentary about surviving the apocalypse in comfortable clothing. They played it because it looked cool, because it felt good, because it had style, because it remembered that games are allowed to be fun without apologizing for it. And that is why the success matters more than the controversy. Because if Stellar Blade had failed, we all know exactly how the conversation would have gone. People would have said this proves games like this do not sell anymore, that attractive female leads are outdated, that fan service is just some embarrassing relic from the past, that this type of character design only exists for a tiny group of basement creatures who have not seen daylight since the Xbox 360 era. And honestly, a lot of people were waiting for that. You could feel it. They wanted the game to fail, because if it failed, they could turn around and say, see, nobody wants this anymore. But then the annoying part happened. People did want it, the game sold, then it came to PC and people wanted it again, so the argument changed. Now it was not games like this do not sell, it became, well, okay, maybe it sold, but only sold because gamers are horny, which is very convenient, because if game like this fails, it proves nobody wants it, but if it succeeds, apparently that also does not count, because the audience wanted it for the wrong reasons. That is such a stupid little trap. No matter what happens, the game is not allowed to win. If people ignore it, the audience is gone. If people buy it, the audience is embarrassing. And this is exactly why Stellar Blade became more than just another action game. It exposed how dishonest the conversation about this stuff can be. Because the moment you admit that the people genuinely enjoyed the game, the whole argument starts falling apart. Maybe people aren't pretending, they just want a good game that actually feels like it was made for them. And that is the part Western games should actually be worried about. Not the outrage or the Twitter arguments, but the fact that Stellar Blade gave a very specific audience exactly what they wanted, and that audience showed up. That should not be controversial, that should be basic business. If you make something for a group of people and those people buy it, that usually means you understood the assignment. But with games like Stellar Blade, people suddenly act like the audience itself is the problem. And that is where the disconnect starts. A lot of players do not feel like modern games are made for them anymore. Sometimes it feels like the industry still wants their money, but also kind of wishes they would shut up, stop having preferences, and clap politely while buying whatever gets handed to them. Stellar Blade did not have that energy. It knew the fantasy it was selling, stylish action, beautiful character design, cool outfits, weird monsters, music that gives the world an actual mood, and combat that feels good enough to carry the whole thing, even when the story is not hitting as hard as it wants to. That is not some impossible formula. That is just a game understanding why someone would actually want to play it. And for some reason, that feels rare now. Because the warning is not that every Western game needs to copy Stellar Blade. That would be the dumbest possible lesson from this. I do not want every game to become Stellar Blade. I do not want Disco Elysium with 47 outfits and jiggle physics. I do not need Red Dead Redemption 3 to have Arthur Morgan doing perfect parries against the Cyber Angel in thigh-high boots. Although, honestly, knowing Rockstar, they would somehow make that cost $400 million and still delay it twice. The point is not the exact genre, the exact character design, or the exact amount of fan service. The point is confidence. Stellar Blade had a clear identity and it committed to it. It did not feel like a game constantly looking over its shoulder, asking if it was allowed to exist. It felt like the devs had a vision, knew who would enjoy that, and trusted these people enough to actually serve them. That is the part Western games should pay attention to. Because when players say they feel ignored, this is usually what they mean. They're not asking every game to become their personal fantasy checklist. They're asking for games that still feel like they were made by people who understand why games are exciting in the first place. A game can be serious, it can be stupid, it can be sexy, depressing, violent, weird, beautiful, realistic, and completely unrealistic. Whatever fits the fantasy it is selling. The problem starts when games become afraid of the fantasy. And yeah, sometimes a character being cool or beautiful or completely unrealistic is part of the appeal. That should not be controversial. That is basically half of the entertainment. And the funny thing is, this is not even some special Stellar Blade rule. This is how most great games work. They understand the fantasy they are selling. Doom is not trying to be subtle, it knows you are here to rip apart monsters while blasting music. Red Dead Redemption is not trying to give you constant dopamine every 12 seconds. It wants you to feel like a dying cowboy riding through a world that is slowly moving on without him. Disco Elysium is not trying to make you feel powerful, it wants you to wake up as the most broken detective alive and somehow still convince yourself this is fine. These games are completely different from each other, but they all understand why someone would care. That is the point. A game does not need to appeal to everyone, it needs to know what it is, who it is for, and why that audience would give a damn. Stellar Blade understood that. It sold a fantasy of beauty, style, action, danger, outfits, spectacle, and a main character people actually wanted to look at for entire game. And instead of acting awkward about it, they leaned into it. This is why the realism argument around games like this always feels so fake to me. Nobody has a problem with unrealistic games until the unrealistic part is an attractive woman. Meanwhile, a man can swing a sword bigger than a car, survive 46 explosions, and get shot in the shoulder and just walk it off. And everybody understands that it is fantasy. But the moment a female character is too beautiful, too sexy, too stylized, or too obviously designed to be appealing, suddenly people start treating it like a serious problem that needs to be corrected. And I just do not buy it. Games have always been exaggerated. That is part of the fun. Everything is exaggerated. Bodies, weapons, worlds, emotions, villains, even the way characters move, because realism is not always the goal. The goal is impact. Stellar Blade understood that impact can come from combat, music, enemy design, atmosphere, and yeah, character design too. That does not mean that everybody has to like it. That is fine. Nobody has to like Stellar Blade. Nobody has to like Eve. Nobody has to like fanservice. You can bounce off the game completely, and that is normal. The problem starts when people act like the thing they personally dislike should not exist at all. That is where this conversation gets so annoying, because there is a massive difference between saying this is not for me and saying this should not be made. One is normal taste, the other is just control with better branding. And that is why Stellar Blade's success mattered. It did not matter because the game was perfect, or because every studio now needs to copy Eve, or because the future of gaming depends on every protagonist having 47 outfits and a body that makes Twitter users salty. It mattered because it reminded people of something simple. The audience was still there. The people who want stylish games, beautiful characters, fan service, spectacle, fantasy, action, and games that actually enjoy being games were still there. They were never gone. They were just waiting for something that did not look at them like an embarrassment. And that is the warning. If Western games keep treating their own audience like a problem to manage instead of people to entertain, they should not be shocked when those players start looking somewhere else, because players do not owe any studio loyalty. They go where the fun is, they go where the excitement is, they go where the game actually feels like it wants them there. And for a lot of people, Stellar Blade felt like that. It was not ashamed of its style, it was not awkward about its fantasy, it was not trying to win a moral approval contest from people who hated it before it even came out. It just made the game it wanted to make, and people showed up. So maybe the lesson is not complicated. Western games do not need to become Stellar Blade. They just need to remember why games like Stellar Blade keep winning. Because when a game has confidence, style, identity, and clear audience, players notice. And when game acts embarrassed to be fun, players notice that too. But that's just how I see it. What do you think? Did Stellar Blade prove something bigger, or are people reading way too much into it? And if you played it, what did you think of the game? Subscribe and I love you. Bye!